Romans 12, 1 and 2, the transformation center of the scripture, really, but certainly of Paul's letter. In it, Paul writes, and I'm gonna do the first part from J.B. Phillips, with eyes wide open to the mercies of God. In NASB, it's, I urge you, therefore, brothers and sisters, by the mercies of God. But then they both go to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. And then verse 2, and do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your minds, so that you may prove what the will of God is, that which is good and acceptable and perfect. Right? Romans 12, 1 and 2 looks back at those first 11 chapters that you and I have worked our way through. It looks back, Paul has them cast their eyes back on what they've heard and realize they've seen the human predicament straight up, both Gentile and Jewish versions of the human predicament. Then they've had Jesus' death come in as a way of rescue from that human predicament through faith, not through works of the law. We got Abraham as an exemplar of that kind of faith, who also demonstrates that you can have righteousness without law, because there was no law when God pronounced Abraham righteous. Then we had in chapters 5 and 6 the invitation to hand over the members of our body to the usefulness of God, rather than to, and here's the first time we got it, rather than to sin. So the choice of where we're going to present ourselves started in chapter 6. Then in 7 we got, oh no, the law is a problem. I would have been fine, except then God said, don't covet. And suddenly I started to covet everything. And Paul's picture in Romans 7 is of a bondage under the law. But we saw in chapter 8 that rescue comes again through the Spirit, through being released from the law, having died to that by which we were bound. And in chapter 8, Paul lays out the glories of life lived in the Spirit. Not entirely what we'll get in the end times. Remember, there's still a measure of suffering. But nonetheless, freedom in spirit that then frees us to give ourselves over to the purposes of God. 9 through 11 are a tortured and quick go at the whole question of how God, who chose Abraham's family through Jacob and Israel to be the blessing to the world, suddenly seems to have track switched and brought Gentiles in on equal footing. Remember last week, we tussled with that picture of a God. I quoted the title of my mentor's article on this, on trusting an unpredictable God. How can we keep trusting God if it seems like God had chosen the Jewish people, but all of a sudden said, okay, Gentiles are in now too? It seemed arbitrary to some. It seemed unjust to some. Paul flipped that and said, this is the way that God has been able to bring everybody in through Jesus Christ, because people could come in then through faith who had never had the law. Right? So it was God's way of making everyone free to come into God's realm of blessing, right? That's where we left off yesterday, or last time, with this big picture of all people having access to the good that God has to give, right? And on equal footing. It is in chapter 12, verse 1 that Paul says, with eyes wide open to all of that, give your life over. Present your bodies. And then the second verse, present your bodies so that you can be transformed by God. I tell you in my prep guide that this passive verb in the transformation verse 2, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your minds. That passive verb, be transformed, is kind of a strange thing in a command. Be hit in the face or be hit over the head, requires a hitter, right? Be let into the house requires somebody to answer the door. It's not ours to do. There's some other agency at play. And here Paul's saying, be transformed with the silent partner in this, the actor being the God of the universe. Right? So we present ourselves, God transforms us.